Dr. Knowles, welcome and thank you so much for spending some time this weekend with us. I would like to start off today's podcast with you sharing a little bit about your background. Tell everybody who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay, well, I have a wide variety of things that I have done in my past. I've been a teacher of students. I've been a teacher of teachers. I've also been a very active writer in both writing curriculums for schools and also in writing books. I'm working on number 14 at the moment. So all of them were published either by a major publisher or the last three were self-published. So, and basically I just I like to research what's currently going on in the community of educators regarding learning and how you can be a most efficient learner. And that for me is developing cognitive skills. And so I work right now and have for the past 11 years, basically in the area of developing cognitive skills such as memory, processing speed, focus and attention, logic and reasoning, those four areas, and really working to exercise those areas because they're not focused on at all in school, yet they are heavily dependent upon for results in learning. So there's a disconnect there, and I try to bring that to the attention of students and teachers and parents.
Got it. So we were fortunate to meet you at a school that we were at formerly, and I remember sitting in on some of those classes that you're doing for teachers, especially with regards to brain and memorization. Can you share with us a little bit about maybe how things have changed over the time since you began, and where we're at now with the idea of the importance of those kinds of cognitive skills like that?
Right. Years ago, we used to rely heavily on memorization. Like I remember when I went to school, we always memorized poetry, and you always had a poem to memorize, and that was just key. And I have a whole bank stored away of different sort of famous poems that I can bring up at any time. We don't do that much anymore. And we also used to be very keen on memorizing like the multiplication tables and math facts. And then with standards, we got more into conceptual understanding of math. So it was more important that you knew what 8 times 7 really entailed and how it looked rather than the answer. And so to me, that's really on scary ground, because any kind of a larger math problem that you have to do, if one of the first steps is a multiplication fact and you get it wrong, then the entire thing is for naught. So I believe that it's very, very important to have a whole bank of things that you can draw on, because you can't always carry Google with you. You have to have some things that you know and that you can call up when you need them. And everything that you learn is basically connected to something that's already in your head. And good teachers know that they have to kind of get that all going before they can add on and expect you to understand what they're currently trying to get you to do. So memory is really, really important. And you find people that say, I'm losing my memory, I can't remember anything. And that's not an issue. The issue is focus. You don't focus on what you're trying to remember. So you just do things so automatically that you have no recollection of them. So then you think you've forgotten, but that's not the case. And it's easily changed by just some focus on the steps that got you to that particular point. So memory there's a man by the name of last name Clem, K-L-E-M-M, and he writes on memorization all the time. And I have referred to him a lot in my presentations and in my books, because I strongly agree that memory, we are not focusing on memory like we should. We are not building that skill. And yet we expect kids to remember stuff all the time. We expect them to be able to recall what they've heard in class, what they've read, what they found out, what they saw. All of it is supposed to be remembered, but we don't really teach them how to develop that skill.
for those of us that may not be as familiar as you are, could you please describe to me what really is, say, a student's short-term memory versus something more long-term in the context of how do we apply knowledge, right? The application of knowledge to solving a new problem. Could you maybe speak to that a little?
Right. So short-term memory or working memory is unfortunately extremely short. It's only like, I think, measured by seconds or by word bytes, sound bytes, whatever. It's relatively, it's not really something that we can rely on for a lot of learning on the first go round. We have to do a lot of repetition and a lot of connecting in order to make whatever we're trying to get kids to understand or to apply to their long-term memory. Think of it like a file drawer, and you have to be able to put it somewhere and then be able to get to it. And that is, there's a big difference between working memory and long-term memory. And unfortunately, it's very often the teacher's job to help kids to make that connection between what they're working on right now and what they already know, in order to be able to apply what they already know to what they are working on now, in order to make a really firm and knowledgeable answer. So if they're trying to solve a problem, they definitely have to hear what you're saying, hear what you've presented to them, process that, but then also dig deep into their mind in order to find a connection point so that they can then apply skills that they've learned in the past to solve the problem. So it's very, it's hard to really understand, for kids to understand that, how important it is to process what you're doing right now. There's that whole processing speed element where you have to be able to listen to what the teacher is saying and process it and remember it long enough to apply it to the problem the teacher wants you to solve. And very often there's just too much external noise and distractions, to make that possible. There's a lot of kids that simply can't do that. They can't listen to what you're saying, hear what you want them to do, then take that all and hold it, refer back to what they know, and then come up with an answer. They get lost somewhere in there.
So let me ask, well, I was just going to piggyback off of that when you were talking about it's a teacher's job, right? And I know that you've worked with teachers before as well. And I saw in your bio that you actually taught, at the university with some of these teachers. So my concern is I'm seeing some of what you're seeing, right? The teachers who are now coming out of school are not necessarily using those same techniques that maybe even I learned back when I was in school to be a teacher. Do you think it requires us to have a paradigm shift almost back to the way we were in order to bring about the building those memorization skills?
Yes, I believe that we've gone far off the path for what we're doing, because generally we are more concerned with regurgitating things for an end of the year test. That seems to be the driving force. And that's just not what it's all about. It really isn't. And I think, and I understand, I totally understand. I taught it on the university level graduate courses for teachers for quite some time. And I actually gave it up because teachers were so distressed over the pressure put upon them to pass the state tests, and that was the sole focus of their existence in the classroom, and that they were just, there were no more teachable moments, because you were always driven toward a certain goal, and that always resulted in test results. And so they were really distraught over that, because you couldn't just, you had to have a lesson plan. It had to be okayed by the upper echelon, and it just they were very distressed about that. So yes, I believe that the system has to change before we can actually change the way we teach.
That's actually why I was going to get my PhD to teach teachers. And I remember sitting through a class that had to do with educational policy when, you know, all these changes were taking place with regards to teacher pay. And I was like, I can't do it. I cannot look an adult in the face and say, be a teacher in the state of Florida at the time. No. But let's talk a little bit about some of those students. So we know that that's already lacking as far as teachers coming out of the system. And we know that they might not be getting that rote, you know, that there is not that focus anymore on that. Let's talk a little bit about gifted children, or those who are in the varying exceptionalities. Why is it so important, especially for these children, to have those skills built?
Because I think their options are so much greater than the normal kid who's just going through class and trying to meet the basic goals in order to get to pass and move on to the next grade level. Gifted kids bring a whole different set of skills and of interests and history, background knowledge, the whole 9 yards to the table, to the desk, to the classroom. And so I find really that gifted kids, or the kids who are really doing well in school, also need help with these cognitive skills, because there's still always room for improvement because of the way they have been taught. So if you, one of my favorite things is under the category of logic and reasoning, this process of elimination, which is what needs to be done in order to be successful in multiple choice tests. And we have, you know, the state tests, many tests, graduate level tests, all of them are multiple choice. And so you have to be able to learn how to get to that one right answer by eliminating the two obvious ones that are wrong, and then not having to flip a coin with the other two, but actually making it an intelligent decision. So I work a lot with building the process of elimination skills in order to help kids be more confident and more comfortable with taking a multiple choice test, which they very often have. And they are very often concerned about those, you know,
Right.
They worry about them and they say, you know, I read the things and I know it, but then I get to the choices and I'm like, what? You know, so that's a skill that really helps kids of all backgrounds, but it's especially good for any gifted kid who has the ability to do well on those tests, but gets bogged down by the structure. So working on that kind of cognitive skill is important. And, you know, processing speed too. I mean, I find gifted kids really are sometimes have difficulty with focus and attention because they're always thinking of other things, and one thing leads to another. It's like that, you know, when you start searching for something on Google, and before you know it, you can't even remember what you first started with because you're already somewhere totally different. Well, that's kind of the way I see that. So if you look on focus and attention along with processing speed, and you get them really to focus on a short amount of time and a very definite piece of literature or facts that they need to learn, teach them how to do that in a time frame. It's really good. So I work a lot with a timer, because a timer should be a friend. It shouldn't make you nervous. Because look at all the sports that they are guided by the timer. And you always try to beat your record, your speed or whatever. And that's really helpful with all kids, to be comfortable with working under pressure in a small amount of time and really being able to focus and get the most out of the time that you're given, because
Right.
about everything is timed.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I want to go back, I think 2 points. A couple points ago, you mentioned test taking strategies. I'm so much in agreement with you on that. I refer to it I explain it to the kids as, you've got to know the rules to the game or you can't win the game, right?
Right.
And I'll give you an example that I'm always amazed that kids don't think about it this way. But if you have a math problem with units, some of the answers won't even have the right units. So you can automatically discount any number that does not have the appropriate units. If they ask for force and they're not giving you newtons, then eliminate it, right? And I actually am amazed that is not more intuitive with the kids, but I do agree that we should just teach the rules of the game, right? What are the rules of the SAT or the end of year testing? So I just wanted to go back just a minute and really reiterate and agree with you strongly that you cannot win in the academic world if you don't know the rules.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I don't know very many people that realize that you can actually teach process of elimination to a point where it becomes second nature, so that it's no longer sweaty palms and, this kind of thing. Because I have had so many students, high school students in the past that I have trained with process of elimination. And they have been amazed at how their confidence has been restored and how they are not concerned. They're able to apply their knowledge because they're not caught up in, this horrible feeling of I'm down to 2 and I can't figure it out kind of thing.
Right.
But they have this much more sophisticated way of looking at the choices, making correct selections that way. So it's amazing that can actually, there's plenty of material out there. There's a book called Perplexers, which is a whole, I think it's Mindware is the publication company. It's a whole series of books that does process of elimination. It's wacky stuff, but it's amazing how after you do that for a while, it just clicks and you're like, and once you start seeing that, the positives of that, you apply it elsewhere. And therefore you're able to really get through all of the nervousness and the wailing about, oh, I can't do this.
Yes.
And you can go directly to using those skills to eliminate the wrong answers.
Would you agree that regardless of a child's ability, where they fall in the ability groups, low end, high end, the middle, that you can reduce the fear of failure, especially on things like multiple choice assessments, if they know they start out with basically 0 points and there's no penalty for a wrong answer, you only get credit for right answers. I often, sometimes you have that child that just says, I got to be perfect, so I can't, if I don't answer it, somehow that's more perfect. What are your experiences or thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, there's a bunch of different cognitive skills that come into play with that. Once you have trained the process of elimination and you get them to understand how that works and how they can just be better and more confident at that once you've trained that skill, then you go into things like the time element of it and focusing on, okay, here you have this section of the test and you now know how to get to the right answer by your process of elimination skills. The next thing then is to really look closely at the time frame and not get, how many kids get really upset because the clock is ticking and they're still on trying to figure out whether it's C or D, this kind of thing. So and then should they answer or should they skip, or how are they going to go back to the right one, that they need to think more on, and this sort of thing. So time is also a huge element there. And by working with them with regard to the clock and using the clock effectively, the timer. I mean, I buy timers in bulk because I give them out everywhere. And I say, not only do you use the timer with your homework or with a section of your homework or with your studies, use it with your chores and with anything else that you have to do, to know that you need to focus on this for now, a short period of time, and then you can, move on because you have given it your 100% during that time frame. So
I have 2 kind of comments on that. And then I want to, just for the sake of time, kind of move it towards a little bit about how we've been working on some books with students recently. But in regards to the timing, I always find it interesting. There are some accommodations with students now, and we have more and more accommodations every year that will say can't have anything timed. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, about how how maybe that's a disservice.
It is.
Maybe we should be not using that as an accommodation, but rather using it to help them be more successful.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting thought. The other thing I wanted to share with you is, when I was back in the public school setting and we were having to teach to a test, we also were teaching those strategies of the process of elimination. The idea that there's an absolutely correct answer. There's one that's correct, but not for the question. In other words, if you were just skimming, you're going to see that information in there. There's one that's a 50-50, and then there's one that you can absolutely remove. And if you can kind of look at it, that's generally how these kind of tests, even for the ACT and SAT, when it comes to that, and I'm thinking about long-term, not just getting through high school, but for applying for colleges, those strategies about being able to understand that it's not necessarily just about my knowledge, but it's about how I can construct questions and answers. And again, that whole timing factor, realizing that, okay, everybody has a deadline for something, how we work within that, we can work towards getting there. We don't have to, you should be practicing with a timer. I think you're absolutely right.
Absolutely. And it should be a positive tool, not something that's going to make you crazy. You're not looking at the clock. Plus, to go back to no time limit, that is so destructive, because you're talking about gifted kids too. They have, their mind wanders, and that is logical and purposeful and meaningful and good, but it's also a detriment to if you have something in front of you that needs to be done and you're not watching the clock, and the clock is a friend of yours. Basically, you know how to say, okay, so during these 3 minutes, I'm going to really focus. Then after the 3 minutes, I can wander a bit. Then I have to focus again for a time frame and really, really, really work. And then after that, I can, that's the way I work out. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah. It's the same principle. I mean, you just focus on one thing. And if you teach that skill separate from schoolwork, just in general, and then you move it to schoolwork and specifically to testing, it's the same way with the process of elimination. I start out with just teaching that skill. And then move it into how do you break it down with the multiple choice test, per se, like what you're saying about the 4 choices, and how do you
how you do that.
But you apply that cognitive skill first.
Just to pivot now again, for just the sake of time. So for our listeners, Dr. Knowles has been, she's got such a wide background, and she works in so many different areas, and one of which is her books, which she has mentioned one of them, but she has quite a lot out there. In particular, we met over the summer because there seems to be a lack of books available in a certain area. Would you share with a little bit about the work that we're doing now and how that came to be?
Right. Well, I'm working on a book that's an update of a book I wrote in 2001 about Florida, and specifically for 4th grade teachers, and how to find materials and books to support the Florida curriculum in social studies, which is part of the 4th grade curriculum. And the book that was written in 2001, that's 20 years ago, it's very outdated. And in trying to find literature for kids that will support the new things that are happening in Florida, I came across a serious void in the area of the Space Coast. And now so many exciting things are happening on the Space Coast at Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral, with NASA, with SpaceX especially. And there's nothing out there really for kids about that. Kids in this area, the area around the Treasure Coast, the Space Coast, they know more because it's right in the news all the time. But anybody else in the rest of the USA, nobody knows. And there must be a whole bunch of kids out there who still would like to be astronauts, so they need to know what currently the strides that we've made. And the thing that really made me crazy was the Falcon 9 landing back down. I mean, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about that. I mean, I'm a space shuttle person. I watched all of that and everything. But this, with that new ability, and with Crew Dragon and all of that, I'm like, I've got to read about this, and I have to see picture books about this and kids' books. And there aren't any. There simply are not any. So that's how I spoke to Shauna about the possibility of kids being involved who have this knowledge, who have this background, who have this interest in it, to be able to put together something for kids I have really been beating the bushes to try to find people who have this background, who have access to photos and to information to put something together for kids, because there just isn't anything out there. And why is that? I don't understand it. And it really bothers me.
Well, it's been great. I think where we kind of created this kind of alliance is then we have the kids kind of writing that. So some of our students who work with the Wolfpack have a little bit of knowledge, but what I love about it is that by having them write the book or having them illustrate the pictures, they're then not only becoming the learners, but they're the teachers as well. How does that kind of learning experience fit in with the idea of that cognition? Are they going to remember more because they're teaching it, or what's your thought on how we can connect
Absolutely, that's one of the main things they recommend for learning. And for memory, if you want to remember something, teach it to somebody. That's, share what your knowledge is and review it with somebody else. That's a huge key to being successful at memorizing. So yes, that's important. And it's also important for them to share what they know and then to research what they don't know, and to have, people look over what they've written in order to verify that it's correct, and guidance for how to move through in an organized manner in sharing this. It's just, there's just so many things out there. It's almost mind-boggling to try to narrow it down to what. So consequently, we're looking at multiple resources as a result of this first effort that we're doing, because it's hit upon things that, again, there's nothing out there. There's not, when you look at, you go to Barnes and Noble and you look in the children's section and you look at the picture books, picture books aren't dead. They're not dying. They're not limited. There's still lots and lots of picture books. And I'm a firm believer that picture books are to be used for middle school, high school, college. I use them with adults. I'm doing a presentation and it's all based around picture books. So it's not saying that if picture books are for toddlers. No. Picture books are for everybody. And this is such a great way to share about what's happening currently in the space program. And we're not getting out there, and this is why this is so important, what these students are doing.
I'm really excited about that as well. I know we're basically at the end of our time, but I wanted to give you a chance. The final question is always kind of like if you have some advice. So for any young teachers out there, especially in light of what we've talked about with maybe the old school way, or any advice for teachers coming out about how they can employ this in their classroom. But if you also want to give any mention to any of the books, or where they can find you or your website, or where anyone can go if they want to get more information of you, feel free to use that time as well.
Okay, yes, I have the book that I wrote about using picture books in middle and high school. And I also have a book on this brain exercise and how to incorporate games that you can buy on Amazon that could be done in family game night, but that are significantly important in building these skills. And they don't appear to be connected to anything in school, but yet they really, really are. And they're building these underlying skills that are so important. And I deal with the 4 basic ones that I mentioned at the beginning, but they're all intertwined, because you have to have one in order to have the other. So that book, also within the book, I've listed all the games that I recommend for each of the skills, so that it's doable, it's easy to incorporate in the classroom in a game corner. It's easy to do at home with making those selections of those games for game night, or for a box of games that you have for family time or whatever. So there's lots of ways to incorporate this, and it's not school based. It's not, like flashcards and learning terms and vocabulary and things like that. It's actually games. But the games are working on building these specific skills. So I have an author's page on Amazon with all my books. I'm on LinkedIn. My website currently is in disrepair. I'm trying to get it back up again. But basically, I really try hard to get teachers to understand that this is something you can do quite easily off to the side in the background as part of free time, and still build these skills in order to apply to what they're trying to do in the classroom. So
Well, I really want to thank you for being with us. I literally took notes because you were giving me some great tips for one of my math classes. So I've literally been making some notes about some adjustments and some applications of some of these important issues that you've raised with us today.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
And we look forward to maybe touching base with you again when we get that book ready to head out with the kids stuff on space. So that would be great. Thanks once again, Dr. Knowles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.